Hi, everybody, and welcome to the very first episode of Paranormal Stories and Coffee. In these next episodes, we are going to talk a little bit about some of my experiences with paranormal experiences that I've had, as well as stories that I've heard around the world and from other people, and of course, stories that you guys will send me, hopefully. Feel free to post some comments or look in the description box on the profile, and you'll see the email there, and you can send us any experiences that you want to share with the rest of us. To start, let me introduce myself. My name is Vanessa. I am originally from South America, and although this is going to be mostly a English speaking channel, there will be some Spanish thrown in there because I have hopefully a lot of guests that I want to bring on in some of the future episodes that do not speak English, but no worries. We will obviously put subtitles. Everything will be translated so you guys can join us on this paranormal journey. So, without further ado, let's get into it. So our very first episode, as you see in the title, is called I Was Haunted by Elves. And no, not the type that you sit on the shelf. It is not a cute little Christmas elf that you would normally think about when you hear the term elf. This is more of what you would hear in, you could say, Mexico. They call them duendes. I know in a lot of Spanish-speaking countries they call them duendes. In Mexico, there is some legends of elf-like creatures, and they're called chaneques, and they are a little bit different than what we normally would associate an elf with. They are more of a guardian of nature, but they do have their dark side. So the term duende in Spanish refers to the master of the house. It sounds a little bit odd, but there are stories of these elves, duendes, however you want to call them, from all over the world, from Europe to South America to North America. There's just been legends and stories told for centuries. So with that out of the way, let's start with my experience. My story starts when I was about 5 years old, and we were living in New Jersey. And I remember clearly having these imaginary friends, and there were two of them. They were small little creatures, and I don't know if I could really describe them. To me, they kind of looked like the 90s trolls, or I guess from the movie now of Trolls. They had the fuzzy hair, and I remember having, it was like a stuffed little teddy bear. It was a gray one, and I think it was a white one. And I remember them basically being these, or kind of, the teddy bears itself were kind of their home where they would kind of go into. But the way I would see them were like these trolls kind of thing. And they were just about yay high. They were not big at all. Maybe even smaller sometimes. But I remember that they would always be around me. And you could say like an angel or a devil on your shoulder kind of thing. I would have one on each side of my shoulder at all times. And I remember we would sit down to eat dinner with the family, and it was my two older sisters, my mom, my dad, and we would sit, and I would get my hair yanked, and everyone would see how my hair would yank to the side, and I would start arguing with this imaginary friend. Now, their names were Kingi and Pongi. Weird names, but those were their names, and I've never forgotten them. Pingy was kind of like the angel, the good one, the protector. Pongi was more mischievous, and he liked to pull these little tricks on me and get me in trouble. So it was an everyday thing where I would sit at the table, we were eating, and my juice would spill. And of course, I would get in trouble. My dad, my mom would be like, "Oh, Vanessa, there you go again. Like, you're always so clumsy. You're spilling." And I would say it wasn't me. It wasn't me. I swear it was Bongi. And they were like, yeah. Obviously, I'm a 5-year-old with an imaginary friend and I make a mistake. And they just, assumed that I was blaming it on my imaginary friend. So from there, it just kept happening and it kept happening in my hair and it would get yanked. And I remember clearly how the good one, let's say Pingy, the protector, would fight, would argue and fight, and they would like yank each other's hair. I remember seeing that, how, Pongi would laugh and kind of just have this, little mischievous laugh and smile of, haha, I kind of am getting you in trouble, getting away with it. And then the other one would get mad and try to stop him. But it would always be my head being pulled back, my hair getting yanked. And I would cry, obviously, and I would be like, hey, like they're pulling my hair. And obviously nobody saw what I was seeing, so they didn't believe me. Until one day, we're sitting at the table, and my juice spills. However, this time, my dad saw the cup literally move by itself. And he didn't yell at me. He didn't say anything. And I remember my mom getting mad and my dad kind of just like stopping her and being like, forget it, don't say anything. But from then on, I want to assume they believed me. And I remember it would happen and I wouldn't get in trouble anymore. Or my dad would be like, hey, leave her alone, stop bothering. And it kind of felt like, in a way, I was happy that my dad was believing me. But I never felt in any way in danger with them. I didn't feel like I was, um, that they were evil in any way or anything. I just felt like one of them was just a mischievous, imagine it, just a child, like a mischievous little child just trying to do pranks and a trickster. And the other one was more of like a goody two-shoe where he didn't want to do anything to get you in trouble. And it just felt normal. I guess I just normalized it as a child. I didn't see anything wrong with it. And that happened all through the time that we lived in this particular house, where other paranormal experiences happened. But that's for another episode. There was a lot of things happening in that house. And I think a lot of my family just assumed that it was just more of the paranormal happening there. However, my parents did separate, they divorced, and we ended up moving from that house. And that was the last I heard of them. I've never seen them, heard of them again. I want to think that they were there mostly for kids. And I think that once you grow, it's just assumed that you had an imaginary friend. And that was all there is to it. There's nothing more than that. You were a child, you had a wild imagination, you had imaginary friends, it's normal. But I think most people, once they grow and they turn into adults and the day-to-day lives that they live and everything, responsibilities and just everything that just clogs your mind, and then you just forget about these things and you don't pay no mind, or you're like, yeah, that's just childhood things. But funny enough, there's so many other people around the world that have similar stories. One of my favorite podcasters, which actually is the inspiration for me to start sharing my stories, it's a Mexican podcaster, and his podcast is called Extra Anormal with Paco Arias. And he has amazing stories that he's collected from his own experiences, from his guests, and from people that send him uh, stories and their experiences. One of the episodes that he has, I can't really remember which one it is. He has a couple about these chaneques, these duendes. Um, but what really caught my attention is there's one particular episode where I'm just going to give a brief description because I don't have, I didn't ask for any permission to tell the story from him or from the person who sent it. So just a little quick uh, telling, if you will, is this viewer that he has sent him the story about how she was married and she was pregnant, and she would wake up with her hair braided. It was just like a single braid, some part of her hair. And that would just happen and happen over and over all through her pregnancy. And she didn't think much of it. And now that I've done my research a little bit more on these Mexican chaneques, I realize that this is a very common thing for them to do. It's called a chaneque trenza, which is like their braid. Um, so what it is, it's basically these elves or duendes, chaneques, claiming that they're going to take her child, her unborn child. So she didn't know any of this, and she gives birth to a baby girl, I believe it was. I'm not familiar, a baby. And I don't know how old. I don't know if the baby was a month or it was a young infant baby. And so she has to have some work done in the house or something. And she puts the baby down in the bassinet or the crib while this worker is in the house for about 10 minutes safely in the crib. And once the worker leaves, she goes to get her baby and the baby's gone. And they call the police, they track down the worker, they look everywhere. And the thing is, she never found her baby. So it was such a big hit for her that it ended up, breaking off her marriage. It was just too much for them. And they end up divorcing. And years later, she meets another man. They fall in love. They get married. And she ends up pregnant again. And the way they describe it, I'm not familiar. I am not from Mexico, so forgive me. You guys can, if any of you guys are from Mexico or know, feel free to leave in the comments anything that you might know or more about this story or anything like this, because I'm not very familiar with Mexico. But the way he describes it, or she describes it, is the way the houses are is they are, I guess it's like a land, and they have smaller homes of the families kind of together. And so her husband had left to work, and I guess he was working out of the city or something. And her mother-in-law was living in one of the houses next to her. And she comes over, and I believe that she was hard of like either hearing or she couldn't see very well. But the thing is that she goes up to her and she says, "Hey, what are you doing?" And so the girl explains, "Oh, I'm just undoing this braid. I woke up with this braid. It's happened a couple times. It used to happen to me too." And she's like, the older mother-in-law, knowing a bit more, asks her, had it happened previously? And she explained yes. And all through her previous pregnancy, with the baby that she had lost, she had been woken up various times with these braids. And now that she's pregnant, it's happening again. So she had just assumed that it was her maybe sleeping, braiding her own hair. But the mother-in-law is like, "Hey, you are not going to go sleep in your house tonight. You're going to sleep with with me in my house." And she explains to her about these chaneques and how they took her first child and now they want to take her second child again. So obviously this, mother is concerned, and she does as she's told. That night she goes to the mother-in-law's house, and The way it's explained is that the mother-in-law told her, hey, go sleep, relax. It was nighttime. But obviously, she was not sleepy. She couldn't sleep. She was nervous. Until finally, I guess, the tiredness, the stress, the exhaustion, I mean, being pregnant and going through all this, finally got to her, caught up to her, and she fell asleep. The last that she remembers was that her mother-in-law had bought, I want to say cigarettes, tequila, and playing cards. And she had spread out the cards on the table as if they were gonna play, like they were playing a card game, and just kind of stopped mid-game and left the cigarettes and the bottle. At some point during the night, she wakes up with her mother-in-law covering her mouth and telling her, shh, like, don't say anything, don't scream. If I let go, you cannot scream. And so the mother-in-law says, do you understand? And she nods, yes. So she lets go of her mouth, and she sits up in bed, and she sees these creatures that were a type of humanoid, but not exactly, had very weird features to them. And they were smaller, sitting at the table. And she explains that one was clearly male and one was clearly human because they were not wearing their clothes, so you could see their genitals and their areas, and that you can clearly tell that there was a female and a male. And they were sitting at the table, and they were getting angry because they were trying to play the card game as humans do. They were trying to imitate humans, and they didn't know how. So they were getting frustrated. So the male was like banging on the table, getting angry. Finally, the female tries to grab a cigarette and tries to light it and smoke it, and she can't. And she gets angry. And so they're like banging on the table. And then the male goes to try to pour or open the bottle of tequila, and he can't do it. So at that point, the mother-in-law goes, and she can't see very well. I think that's what it was. So she just kind of like grabs something, a bat, or I don't remember what it was, if it was wood or some type of weapon, let's say, like just a piece of wood, a plank or something. And she, in the dark of the night, and with being that she can't see very well, kind of just grasps to see if she can grab one of them. And she manages to grab the female of these elves. And she starts beating her to a pulp, just with this plank, just hitting her, basically, trying to get rid of them, and for them to know that this is not an easy target, that they can't come back here. Somehow, the male manages to escape, and the female kind of comes out of her grasp and crawls and runs out the door. And the mother-in-law turns back to the girl, who is shaking and scared because she's seeing all this. And she tells her not to worry, that they won't be back. So from what that story, at least the second pregnancy, had a happy ending. Unfortunately, she never did find her first child. And there's many theories to what happens. And if you speak Spanish, I definitely invite you and tell you, go watch this podcast, because there's so much of just different things. And if you're interested in this particular subject of Chaneques, Duendes, he has incredible stories. He has amazing guests. And it's so informative too, because you learn so much. And one of the things that I learned is that some theories is that they take the children to eat them. But the theory that I've heard the most is that because they want to be like humans and they cannot procreate, they take these children and somehow turn them into one of them. There's another story that he tells about a boy. I think one of his guests had this story about a boy who had been found after about a year that he was missing. And when they found him, it looked like he was sleeping, but he was presumed dead, but he wasn't. Or maybe he was. I can't remember very clearly. But the thing is that when they found him, his facial features had clearly changed. Like his ears had been elongated into elf-like ears, and his just features, the color of his skin had changed into like this bluish gray color. So most of the theories that I've heard is that they end up taking these children to turn them into their own species, and I guess that's how they just um, survive and procreate, to say, because they really can't. Um, so he has some interesting stories of these elves and Chaneques. There's another story that recently I heard from him as well, from one of his viewers. Very similar to the first one. She was pregnant. She was a nurse in some little town in Mexico, and she was getting like every day she would wake up with little pebbles, and she would see little children playing. So she just assumed that it was the children that was leaving these little pebbles in her yard. And it was all through her pregnancy, to the point where at the end, close to the end of her pregnancy, she had enough where she could make a path with these pebbles. And the same thing, her baby was taken. Thankfully, the baby was found. But one of the elders had said those were the payments. You accepted the payment that they were giving you. They were saying, I'm giving you these pebbles in return for your child. And this is very similar to, I guess, in I know there's many stories about fairies and all over the United States and Europe, and these fae where don't accept anything they give you because they like to leave you little gifts. But you don't know what you're giving in return for these gifts. So, that being said, if you are from Mexico and you have more stories or know of anybody that would like to share their experiences with us, or about any chaneques, or even if you're not and you are from any other part of the world that you have these experiences with these elves, duendes, please let me know what you call them in your country or wherever you're from, and tell me your story. Send us an email, and we'll, if we get enough stories, maybe we can do a part 2 to this episode and continue on. Next episode, I will have a guest with me, and we are going to talk about hints. This is one of my favorite subjects. So look for our next episode, Paranormal Stories and Coffee, and we'll see you next time. Look for our next episode. I was haunted by aliens. Thank you for joining us, and hope to see you soon. Leave a like, subscribe, leave a comment with your own experiences to email us, and thank you for joining us today.